Well, here it is. It has taken a little bit of a while. Life has thrown me some curveballs over the last couple of months that have put delays into this. But this is a long video. I'm so pleased with how it's turned out, this Fallen City. It's really versatile. You've just seen one of the layouts. And they're almost endless. I've not run out of ways of doing it yet. You'll see a few more at the end of the video if you stick around. But as I say, it is going to be a long video. There's a lot in it. So here we go. Let's do this. Over the last few months, I have, through car boot sales and kids in the family who've grown up and donated a bunch of this sort of old castle stuff. So I have these, all of these parts, and there's many of them. Some are not really the right scale. And I'm just, now I want to play with what I've got. The idea is I just want to make sort of modular sections that I can use for creating city environments. So I'm going to spend an hour now just playing, seeing what sort of modular sections I can make from what I've got here. It's going to be a lot of fun. See you in a bit. So here we go. Here's an early stage layout, which is obviously previous to me having finished the EVA bases, Fallen City bases, which you can see in the video link above right now. So the general layout, this is just one of many, just testing out the actual idea. I played around with a few. This is a piece you can see which I'd already started doing the mods for, which you'll see in a moment. But yeah, I think pretty much this idea will work out quite well. Now there's obviously quite a lot of pieces here, and I don't think you really want to watch me work my way through every single one of them as I show you what I did. But what I do want to do is break it down by the major structure types and show you my process and how I approached each one of those. So yeah, this video, we're going to break it down into chapters, going to try out chapters properly for the first time on YouTube. So here we go. So in the collection of old bits, there was these sort of towers, these turrets, which I really liked, and I felt that they would form a really superb structure to start the gates for the Fallen City. I mean, any city should really have you know, a gateway entrance, and I wanted the gatehouse itself, or the archway of the gates, to look pretty overwhelming, even though it was going to be a broken down structure. So I played around with a few of the parts from the set. I worked out the base sort of footprint, which is the piece of card there, which I've glued to the bottom, and everything is just hot melt glued together. I did sand the plastic prior to hot melt gluing, just to give a bit of a tooth. If you look at sort of Gothic archways or doorways for you know, medieval churches and that kind of thing, there's always a sort of a series of columns or colonnades, they might be called, to either side of the door that rise up to form the archway itself. So I really wanted to put something together like that, even though the doors at this point in time aren't being built for this. The assumption is they've long since rotted away. But what I needed was the column itself that sits alongside the tower, which is what the doors originally would have been attached to. So I just took EVA foam, carved out the base sort of blocks of stone, which you can just see there, those little quarter circle pieces. And then I use the scissors, as you can see here, to just trim the edges of those stones to give them a little bit more shape, a little bit more ruggedness. And that works really well with EVA foam. It's a lot easier than trying to use the tinfoil idea that you use on XPS, and then taking a knife to further hack up and add some nice sharp craggy edges to the stones. It was really bugging me that I didn't know what the individual parts of the construction of a classical pillar were actually called. So I am now gluing the stones that form the stereo bait. There you go. That's the base stone that the pillar will stand on. And then the circular ones that go above this are the stylo bait, before leading into the shaft of the column and up to the capital, which is where it supports the whatever structure is above. That, I believe, is the accurate terms for the construction or the structure of a column like the one I'm building here. So please, any classical architects out there, I would love to know your thoughts on that, my understanding. Okay, so glue that part of the structure into place, and then I'm onto the actual shaft of the column. So I used as the base material a tube out of the kitchen foil. I'm pretty sure it was the kitchen foil. So it's nice and sturdy. I just cut that down to the height that I knew I wanted. I didn't do any measuring here. I was just eyeballing it, really. So I was going to get a grand height, but no real specific measurement. Then that too was glued and stuck into place, and then alongside that I need to have the sort of the little gap between the top of the turret and where the column comes down onto the base pedestal there. So I use these straws to form the kind of detail structure between the side of the turret wall and the side of the column, and it really worked out a nice little detail there just by laying in all of these straws. Next step was to figure out the rough sort of area that the archway, the remnant of the archway, was going to leave, and I just eyeballed this against the column itself to get a feel for how big that should be. Just freehanded it out on a piece of EVA foam there. So chop that out of the EVA, and also I've already pre-made this the capital, which is basically the same thing that sits at the bottom, the stereo bite, and glue that to the top along with the archway, which has been cut and textured like the rest of the stones now. One of the telltale signs we all know we have to kind of get rid of on these kind of tubes is that sort of rib that runs around the tube, a part of its manufacture. So I sliced some thin slivers of EVA foam from a thicker foam, so I got a nice ragged kind of surface to them, just using a knife, and then I used those slivers to go around the tube, creating courses of stonework, which added a lot of texture, and it's something I will do again for sure. The walls were a bit more straightforward than the gatehouse archways, because it was just really a case of extending details outward, covering bits of the plastic design that I didn't like, and also adding sectional bits of wall that would protrude outward to add a little bit more interest in game, areas of cover. I also added walkways and the odd bit of broken secondary story floor to add more dramatic options for in-game play. There were a number of toy medieval soldiers in the box of bits as well. So most of those were stuck onto plinths, like these shaped ones you can see just to the left here. But I also wanted to chop a couple of them up, so basically just really kind of hacked apart the toys. The plastic was actually quite bendy, as you can see here. It wouldn't just crack, it just really bent. But I got it apart in the end with some snips. And then I just really glued these together to make it look as if the statue had been broken, damaged by some previous impact, which adds just a little bit of narrative to the broken terrain. I've always really fancied putting together a nice big set of steps to use in modular dungeons or cities. So this was an ideal opportunity. We've got a grand hall, so we need some grand steps to lead up to it. Now basically all I did was figure out a half circle on the EVA. I just went as big as I could on one single EVA tile. And then I just using a compass, I figured out where each set of flats and descents would happen on the stairs, and used those measurements to create these stepped kind of buttresses that will sit underneath the actual step structures themselves to give some stability to the foam. I didn't want to carve this out of a solid block, so it's kind of hollow on the inside by building up the sort of an internal skeleton, as it were. So when I created the half circle, I actually created a full circle on the EVA tile, so I could use the other half to chop out the flats that would and steps that would descend down this internal skeleton. So starting at the top, I just laid down some hot melt glue and then laid the first piece, and then I chopped out the next section from my secondary semicircle, gluing that down in place. I actually really quite like this this design at this point here. Obviously not as a staircase, but I felt it could be the frontage to some sci-fi building or something if windows were placed in there. I just felt that there was a good shape here to play with for potential future projects. I worked over the top of the underlying skeleton with a secondary piece of foam that would just create a sort of a wall-like structure that would sort of span out from the central dais at the top down the steps in 4 different directions. I hadn't really got any sort of predefined plan here. I was just playing with the shape as it evolved in front of me, and I think that's often a good way to work. Okay, so on to chopping the steps themselves. So from my secondary piece of EVA, I just lay it down over the top, get an eyeball measure and chop out the section of EVA foam I need to start creating the drop of the steps. Now you'll see that there are 3 lines on the EVA there, and all I do now is chop along those lines so that I can step down the foam from the top dais to the secondary flat. So glue that into place, and then we can carry on with the lower tiers and going around to all the way around to the other side of the stairway as well. Now, it was the painstaking process of laying in all of the different sized flagstones around the flats, the steps, and also the dais at the top there. This took quite a while, but I think it was definitely well worth it to have individually carved flagstones around the build. So my basic process here for flagstones is to very roughly chop out the square of the area that a flagstone takes up. Now I use the 8 to 10 mil floor tile EVA here, which is just a little too thick for what I'm trying to do. So basically what I do is I take my knife and I slice through the centre, through the thickness, so I reduce my single cut tile into 2 tiles. Now that cut surface where I've gone through the middle, I want to have that as the exposed surface of the tile facing upwards. And that is the same principle process for all of the flagstones, no matter what their sizes are. You'll also see I've scattered a few random pieces of just rough cut EVA foam to help support the idea of broken rubble. I wasn't 100% sure how I was going to finish off these walls that came down the stairway, but I came up with the idea of these plinths, which would add some elevated feature around the frontage of the stairway, and I thought that would look quite nice on the game table. I made a selection of straight stairways as well, so that I could put stairs wherever I felt I needed in the modular terrain, and I did this in pretty much the same way. I created a hollow sort of box shape, you can just see it there behind where I'm cutting, that would provide the flats and the downs for the steps themselves, and then I carved out of rough offcuts of EVA foam some larger flagstones that would span the base structure. For the vertical stonework on these, I did switch back to an older technique, which is to use my pyrography tool, just a wood burning tool that I could carve into the EVA foam, just the random stones that matched up with what the moulding of the base toy pieces gave me. Just remember, guys, if you are doing any kind of heat treatment with a wood burning tool or otherwise into EVA foam, you must be wearing a respirator. The fumes from EVA are not a pleasant thing, and they will cause you a great deal of harm if you breathe them in for too long. Now with these straight stairs, I did make a couple of longer sections like this, and also a couple of shorter sections so that I could stack them in situ on the game table and extend the kind of versatility of the stone steps themselves. The first step on sealing EVA is always a heat treatment with a hot air gun to seal the porosity of the surface. But the major component of sealing EVA is PVA. You can use, I know Plasticoat works very well, but Plasticoat is obviously a lot more of an expensive option, but it does work really, really well. But PVA I have found to be by far the best budget option for sealing EVA. But the secret to it is to be generous. You know, dollop it on and really be generous with the amount of PVA that you seal the surface with, and then you will get a really hard, rigid finish, which is what puts a lot of people off EVA foam, is because they think it's flexible and it folds and it bends easily. But in actual fact, once you've done this initial 2 stages of sealing, it gets really rigid then and very, very durable. Far more so than, for example, XPS foam. To add to the aging, I also use browning plaster, which is kind of like a very, very fine plaster, similar to grout, so either or, and I dust that over along with my other go-to material, which you've seen me use many, many, many times, which is vermiculite, which is a ground up cork. That you can get from the garden centres. It's quite cheap and it's perfect for small rocks and debris in that sense. And basically I just sprinkle that over, generous helpings, and then I just tamp that in with the brush I used for the PVA. So it just helps to mulch the PVA with the those grounds. And that'll add a lot of texturing, and it will also go to hide any areas that I'm not keen on with the EVA finish. Now when it comes to doing the same application to the areas with the plastic moulding, that needs to be sanded first. So just take a piece of sandpaper to lightly sand over all of the plastic areas, and just to get a bit of a tooth. I mean, this is a coarse grained sandpaper, but it's not going to take any detail away as such. But it'll give something for the PVA to actually bond to more readily. And then just continue on with exactly the same application process as I gave to the basic EVA blocks with PVA, browning plaster, vermiculite to apply that texture all over. Those soldiers, the knights and whatever from the figures, those will be dealt with in a different way, so you'll see that shortly. And so they won't actually need any PVA coating. On the wall sections, I only obviously apply the vermiculite around the bases of the walls. The browning plaster goes all over, but the vermiculite is just around the bases so that it adds that amount of broken debris where it would have fallen to. And a light scattering occasionally here and there on some of the flat surfaces, like the top of the wall, the flats of the staircases and stairways. The statues, I wanted to have a aged metallic look to them. So first of all, they're given a light neutral grey undercoat, and then I used a Rust-Oleum aged copper to apply that metallic aspect to the statues themselves. I have to say this worked out really well. I'm not going for a copper finish, but I was going more for bronze. But in actual fact, this colour worked really well, I thought, for bronze. With the subsequent applications of paint that I use, I couldn't get an actual Rust-Oleum aged bronze. But there you go. Now, just to say, anybody who knows me knows that I'm not a fan of painting stone work grey or black, then grey and whatever. So I always tend to start with a richer colour for my base for stonework. So all of the stonework of all the pieces, the statue bases, the walls, towers, stairways, were all given a really thorough undercoat of acrylic paint that was basically a burnt umber and black mix to base coat all of the stonework with. This took an age because there was a lot of stabbing and dabbing into nooks and crannies, but it's the way I chose to go about it. It's not to say you couldn't start with the black, and a grey dry brushing, but it's just not the way I do it. I prefer a bit more chromatic element to my stonework. Just remember, rocks aren't grey. So the other aspect of painting rocks that I tend to do is play around with colour temperature. So that brown colour is quite a warm temperature colour cast. So what I'm doing now is applying the opposite to that. I'm applying a cold colour, which is more of a bluey colour, which was made up of cerulean blue with a little of that brown in it to neutralise it a touch, and white to lighten it somewhat, and then just using a sponge to just dab all over that so we get the mottled look, and some of the warm colour from underneath still comes through that layer, which is a fairly heavy layer of paint. And this again is applied to all of the stonework on all of the pieces and provides that good variable base to apply the glazes and washes that bring the whole piece to life. I covered the actual glazes and washes painting part of this whole set in the first part of the Fallen City video, which you can see the link in the description above now. Well, finally here in a new workshop at the cottage now, and first project to get onto the table finally after, I know, several weeks anyway. It's the continuation of the Fallen City. So let's just move that out of the way. Been packed for the big move, but here we got the pieces, and then I'm going to get out here now so that we can take a look at the finishing stages. So yeah, coming in and take a closer look at what we've got actually ready. Over a year ago, as I was prepping the ground of the allotment, I had a lot of brambles to dig up, and one of the things I realised about bramble roots is that they're really gnarly looking, and they get a very sort of fine filament of branches that come off them, but they're also really durable as well. So it saved me a big bag load of the bramble roots, which I then left to dry, let all the creepy crawlies disappear. So that's been about a year. And then a couple of nights ago, when I knew I was going to be doing this, I got myself a nice big bucket full of water. So yeah, so now what I've got is stuff like this, which is now wet and soft, and it will wrap, and I'll be able to glue it down relatively easily, and then it will dry back out again. Well, in principle, that idea was sound. Unfortunately, the wet roots proved to be somewhat difficult to hot melt glue. Anyway, it was troublesome. Let's say that. Don't wet your roots. So anyway, with that aside, the basic idea is to have a pair of snips nearby so that you can snip parts that are suitable. Find a good strong base point to hot melt glue the base of the stump in, and then wrap the long tendrils of the roots up and around, just following what seems like an interesting route for them to take. These really did work very well. I highly recommend, if you get opportunity to dig up some brambles, do it, and you'll have a supply of this natural resource cheaply, readily, and it's very, very durable. I did find with the fine filament hair-like roots that if you coated them with PVA and tapped them down, they would give you this really lovely network of vines clinging to the rocks. I then dug out my trusty bag of moss, Java moss, I believe it is. I'm not sure. It's anyway. It was bought from a flower shop supplies, wholesale supplies. Cost me about £5, and this bag of moss has lasted me 10 years, I bet. And I'm only halfway down it. Anyway, a PVA, and just tapping in bits of moss here and there around the bases, and wherever's interesting, just to make the to add another dynamic to the aging. And I think it's important to stress that variation in that dynamic is also key to success. So here I'm just adding, it's just a homemade flock, a sawdust flock around the base. Just adds a touch more variation into the vegetation, which is key to that process being a successful one. The vines at this point are actually dry, so I take some PVA and I lightly brush over the PVA over all of the sort of the filament parts, all of the branches, being careful not to touch the actual underlying stonework. So just a delicate brushing of PVA over all of that network of branches. and then a light sprinkling of the flock over that will give the appearance of leaves and tightly knit foliage growing from those branches. I will say that the flock I was using is the same colour as the flock I used against the wall, the sort of the mosses and lichens. If you have different coloured flocks, I would definitely use different coloured flocks. I actually went on and just painted the lichens against the wall so that there was a difference between the leaf structures on the vines and the actual lichens on the wall. I did go for one more level of detailing on the vegetation around the various builds, and that was to use the grass tufts, the self-adhesive grass tufts. I've never used these before, and I was really impressed with how they worked out. So these are definitely going to be purchased in the future, and possibly a static grass applicator, because now I've seen it in the real world what it looks like. So this is Winsor & Newton's Cobalt Turquoise Light, which I think you can only get in the artist grade paints, but it is absolutely perfect for the patina on bronze and copper, you know, those green oxidizing metals. These are the statues for my fallen city. I want them to have a fairly heavy patina, so I'm just going to brush some of this quite thick mixed acrylic paint over my statue. Then I'm going to take off the excess paint and have a brush that's got plenty of water in it, and then I'm just going to push that, just trickle it over this thicker consistency paint so that it starts to get that flow and that run. You know, tease the paint into some of those recesses. And the reason it's doing that is because, and also getting these nice patches, is because of the two different consistencies of paint, because I'm not mixing it into a singular fluid in the first instance. And obviously acrylic dries a little bit darker as well than when you first put it on. So it will settle back a little. And it maybe they'll do some washes over the top of it just to add a little bit more complexity to the coloration, but we'll see how it dries out first.